The seeker asks, how can I restore the vitality, energy, and spirit I have lost? How can I cultivate the Tao? The perfect man answers, the first step is to purify and strengthen your body. Taoism teaches that the practice of mysticism starts with a strong and healthy body. The Taoists' program for strengthening the body involves healing practices and diet that nourishes specific organs with certain foods and herbs. This is our goal and our practice here at the Royal Teton Ranch. It includes exercise systems such as Tai Chi Chuan and Daoyin, as well as breathing exercises. All these practices are designed to stimulate and increase the flow of qi. We can say that qi is actually anchored in the seat of the soul chakra, the point of that center. Qi is a very powerful force and energy. You can weaken your qi, for instance, by eating your drinks with ice cubes. Eating ice drinks with every meal weakens that qi, depletes you of your qi, weakens the bladder, weakens the kidneys. Cold foods, ice creams, salads, popsicles, all those things that are cold, you are placing a coldness in the area of the body where there is an intense focus of fire. And that fire is your qi, it's your energy, it's the point of the center of the soul from which the soul can function and be in that yang state of completing the day victoriously. Qi fascinated the Taoists. William Blake registered their feelings precisely when he exclaimed, "Energy is delight." It certainly is. When you have all the energy you need to do what you need to do every day, aren't you simply delighted? You're joyous. Think of the one reason why we are not so joyous. It's because we don't have enough energy to do all the things we want to do. It's time to really look and see what is sapping our strength. There are a lot of things that we can stop doing and gain back bit by bit the momentum we need to accomplish that great creative work we're working on. For energy is the life force, and the Taoists loved life. To be alive is good. To be more alive is better. To be always alive is best. Hence the Taoist immortality cults, whose goal was to live forever. The seeker asks, the first step in cultivating the Tao is to purify and strengthen my body. What is the second step? The perfect man answers, and what does he say? He says, become empty. That's the great theme of Taoism, become empty. It's the theme of Jesus Christ, become empty that you might be filled and that I might infill you with my Christ presence. Lao Tzu taught, reach the pole of emptiness. To be empty is to be full. Simply because nature abhors a vacuum, if you empty yourself, God rushes in. The mystics of all ages have understood this truth. When we are empty of ego, vainglory, and all self-attachment to ourselves as doers, God fills us with his spirit, and then we know ourselves as instruments of the great doer, the Tao. Then the Tao loves through us, heals through us, teaches through us, and works his works through us. God fills us with his spirit, and therefore I and the spirit of my Father, Mother, God are one. Jesus said, I of mine own self can do nothing. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. The Father was in Jesus because he emptied himself. The Mother was in Jesus because he emptied himself. Thomas à Kempis wrote in The Imitation of Christ, the Lord gives his blessing where he finds the vessels empty. Because the perfect man is empty, he always receives the blessing of the Tao. His emptiness allows him to be continually renewed by the Spirit. His source of power is never exhausted. And thus it is written, perfected people are endowed from a resource that is never exhausted. Lao Tzu wrote. To be worn out is to be renewed. Great fullness appears empty. Its use is inexhaustible. Who is able to have excess to offer to the world? Only the man of Tao. Zhuangzi says, the perfect man embodies completely what is inexhaustible. He may be called the reservoir of heaven. Pour into it, and it is never full. Dip from it, and it never runs dry. This is called the precious light. The precious light. The seeker asks, I know that I must become empty to cultivate the Tao. How do I become empty? The perfect man answers, by fasting the mind and forgetting the self. The master psychologist Kuthumi says, there is a pre-stage to the stage of emptiness. Listen well to this. It is called defining the identity. He teaches that we must first define who we are now, today, right now, as mind, as self. We cannot go on to the stage of emptiness if we do not define the self. When we do, then we can fast the mind and forget the self. Therefore, one must feed the mind the way of the spiritual teaching and the discipline of one's calling, livelihood, or profession. Just as one must first feed the mind in order to fast the mind, so one must remember the self in order to forget the self. Remembering yourself is working on your psychology and especially establishing the connection between your inner loving child and your inner loving adult. The abandoned inner child or soul must find oneness with the Holy Christ self, and this child can only find that oneness through your own inner loving adult. The reason that the first step to the restoration of vitality, energy, and spirit is to purify and strengthen the body is that a pure and strong body is the foundation for a pure and strong mind. Likewise, the vessel that is emptied must be pure and strong, lest it break when the Tao should enter. Too much light can cause the fragile vessel to shatter. God will not do that, and therefore he withholds the fullness of himself. Let's talk about then defining the self and nourishing the mind before we can fast the mind and forget the self. Mark Prophet had a way of teaching this. He said you have to first be selfish in order that you may then be generous. And what he meant by that is that you have to work on yourself. You have to become who you are. You have to become a balanced person. As I was saying earlier, you cannot give away the core of yourself, and the core of yourself cannot be marred or fragmented or injured. You must be willing to work on your psychology in therapy if necessary, or with the many wonderful self-help books that are being written today on psychology. It is very important to have a special kind of teacher for that, a therapist. And so the building of self and the defining of your identity, the nourishing of the mind so that you are equipped for a profession and a calling whereby you can extol and embody the Tao the rest of your life is very important. The path of initiates has a part of it as the surrender to the will of God. How can you surrender to the will of God if there is no one there that is surrendering? If you are a fragmented personality, if you are not balanced mentally, or if you have not accomplished anything or created for yourself a trade or a work of the hands or something that you do for a livelihood whereby you are also perfecting the soul. This is why we must take care to help children and teenagers and people of all ages to discover who they are to become who they are, and to be satisfied and fulfilled in who they are, so that they no longer have to be attached to who they are. And who they are easily slips into the divine matrix of the Holy Christ self. And we have no more need to be paying so much attention to the self and its needs. And we slay the ego so that the inner child can merge through the inner loving adult with a Holy Christ self. That inner child, as you know, that I define as the soul. So you see, it is very difficult for someone who does not pursue the first steps of feeding the mind, nourishing the self, remembering the self. It is very difficult if you have not done that properly. If you come from a dysfunctional home and you have not had that healing that you need, there are wants, there are needs. The soul is crying inside of you to be loved and to be made whole. And so you must become the healer of that soul and that self. You must find that wholeness. Only then can you go on to the second stage of this process. The self that is to be forgotten is the self that can lose itself in the Tao. The ego self cannot be forgotten, nor will it let you forget it. The ego is constantly talking to you as the carnal mind, condemning the soul, condemning the inner adult, condemning the child. The ego self is first of all noisy. It's an attention getter. It's a monkey on a stick. And you find yourself that you are being controlled as the puppet of the puppeteer. We are always subject to the control of others as long as we have an ego who separates our inner child, our soul, from our real self. Your ego is the imposter of your real self, that perfect inner man of the heart, that Christ self we've been speaking of. Zhuangzi taught that we must fast the mind in order to rid ourselves of self-defeating emotions and inner commotions that disturb our balance. Zhuangzi explains this concept in his classic, which is simply called the Zhuangzi. Next to Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi is the most important figure in early Taoism. In his work, he creates dialogues between various sages or between sages and their disciples to illustrate his teaching. One chapter depicts Confucius instructing his favorite disciple, Yan Hui, in the art of fasting the mind. Confucius told him that in order to succeed in his goals, he must fast. Confucius asked him, "Do you know what I mean by fasting? It is not easy, but easy ways do not come from God." "Oh," said Yan Hui, "I am used to fasting. At home we were poor. We went for months without wine or meat. That is fasting, is it not?" Confucius replied, "Well, you can call it observing a fast if you like, but it is not the fasting of the mind." When Yan Hui asked Confucius to explain what the fasting of the mind was, he said, "The goal of fasting is inner unity." Inner unity. The goal of fasting the mind is getting rid of the divisions of the mind that are created by the ego. This means hearing, but not with the ear. Hearing, but not with the mind. Hearing with the spirit, with your whole being. The hearing that is only in the ears is one thing. The hearing of the mind is another. But the hearing of the spirit is not limited to any one faculty, to the ear or to the mind. That is the end of that quote. So hearing can be accomplished through the aura itself. You hear through your aura. You hear through your heart. You hear things at subconscious levels. They affect you consciously, but you do not know why you are being affected. The mystics have always taught that fasting involves more than just abstaining from food and drink. The oldest Persian treatise on Sufism says that fasting also involves guarding the eye from lustful looks. Why? When you guard your eye from the lustful energy that comes from others, you are guarding the energy of the I, which is powerful. You don't allow yourself to be the victim of lusting, nor yourself to lust, for you lose much energy. You guard the ear from listening to evil speech, for the evil speech makes a record in the subconscious. And if you allow yourself to listen to it too long, pretty soon you are having evil speech. You will not listen to evil speech about anyone in his absence. Fasting involves guarding the tongue from vain or foul words and guarding the body from following after worldly things and disobedience to God. One who acts in this manner is truly keeping his fast. For the Apostle Mohammed said to a certain man, "When you fast, let your ear fast, and your eye, and your tongue, and your hand, and every limb." I dreamed that I saw the Apostle Mohammed and asked him to give me a word of counsel, and that he replied, "Imprison thy tongue and thy senses." Forgetting the self or losing the self is another way Taoists describe the process of becoming empty. Losing the self does not mean obliterating your own identity. It means losing the lesser self. It means losing the sense of a self that is separate from the Tao. It means acting in accord with your true nature, the nature of Tao, so that all of your actions are spontaneous and natural. Zhuangzi taught, "No self is true self, and the greatest man is nobody." Lao Tzu said, "Those who pursue the Tao decrease day after day." They have the shrinking man syndrome. They decrease and decrease till they get to the point where they do nothing. They do nothing, and yet there is nothing left undone. Therefore the sage acts but does not rely on his own ability. He accomplishes his task but does not claim credit for it. Don't let your lesser self get in the way of the Tao, and the Tao working through you will leave nothing undone. That is the only way to get anything done when you have so many things to do. You simply have to do nothing and let the Tao do it through you. The Tao will accomplish all things through you, and you will look around and wonder how all these things happened. And you will say, "God did it. I didn't do it, God did it. I was just the observer." The Taoist sage Lu Changgung wrote, "To forget means to have one's mind in all things, but not to have any mind about oneself, and to have one's feelings in accord with all things, but not to have any feelings of oneself." You can't avoid having feelings of yourself while you have not resolved your psychology. You'll go for some period of time totally absorbed in your service, in your activities, and do so joyously. But then there will come a time when that aching part, that depressed part, that part of your feelings that is not whole, that part of your inner child or your soul that is not whole, will express itself in some way or another. And when it does, stop, attend to it, deal with it, reason with it, love your inner child, explain to your inner child that he or she is no longer going to have this burden, because you are going to work together and you're going to overcome it from all levels of being. So to forget and to not have feelings means not to be attached to mind and feelings. They may pass through, but you don't have hang-ups with them. They keep going. You're not attached. The 20th century Buddhist scholar D.T. Suzuki explained, "Man is a thinking reed, but his great works are done when he is not calculating and thinking. Childlikeness has to be restored with long years of training in the art of self-forgetfulness." I don't know about the long years. We can arrest the spirals, and we can accelerate the process. When this is attained, man thinks, yet he does not think. He thinks like the showers coming down from the sky. He thinks like the green foliage shooting forth in the relaxing spring breeze. Indeed, he is the showers, the ocean, the stars, the foliage. You simply need to meditate upon these concepts, and it will come to you exactly what they mean. Forgetting the self means being absorbed in the Tao. The little self is nestled in the big self, so secure that she is subsumed by the great Tao. Forgetting the self means getting rid of inordinate desires and negative psychological habits. What is a negative psychological habit? It is a habit of indulging negative emotions and concepts. You can get into the habit of being negative or thinking when something happens that you should get upset about it, this terrible thing that is happening. You watch these negative psychological habits. Usually they are indulgences, where parents haven't corrected us and put us on a way of constructive activity. And so we may sit and pout, or we may have a momentum of crying when we want our way. Although in this case, as an adult, it may be translated to manipulate oneself into a position of illness so that others will have to take care of you. In other words, wanting to have a codependent relationship with someone so that you are being taken care of and you don't have to do your own work at becoming whole. A negative psychological habit is always self-indulgence. So you watch those, and don't let yourself get moody. Don't let yourself get this, that, and the other thing that you know is not the reflection of your perfect sage man. Lao Tzu warned of the danger of inordinate desire and self-concerns. He wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "Who is puffed up cannot stand. Who is self-absorbed has no distinction. Who is self-revealing does not shine. Who is self-assertive has no merit. Who is self-praising does not last long. As for the way, we may say these are excessive provisions and extra baggage." Lao Tzu advocated a life of simplicity. A life of simplicity. I have found that the greatest simplicity that I can know is to get rid of anything and everything that I don't actually need. It's wonderful. And every day I find out how much I don't need. Things you never use, things you don't want, things that collect and pile up. It's just amazing to get rid of the stuff in the outer so you can also get rid of the stuff in the inner. To me, simplicity is the least amount of possessions. He said in the Tao Te Ching, "Of crimes, none is greater than having these things that one desires. Of disasters, none is greater than not knowing when one has enough. Of defects, none brings more sorrow than the desire to attain." That is, to attain in the eyes of the world. Therefore, the contentment one has when he knows that he has enough is abiding contentment indeed. If your desires are great, you are bound to be extravagant. If you store much away, you are bound to lose a great deal. If you know when to stop, you will suffer no harm. According to another text, Lao Tzu taught, "Those who practiced the way in ancient times ate according to the size of their bellies, dressed to fit their bodies, lived in enough room to accommodate them, acted in accord with their true condition. Those who are like this can be called able to understand and embody the way." That whole phrase is one noun. People who are like this are called able to understand and embody the way. The Master Wang Chongyang instructed his disciples on forgetting the self. You must replace a heart of stray thoughts and desire with a heart of the Tao. If you do not know your heart, you do not know the Tao. A heart of the Tao is a heart that is emptied of everything that is not the Tao. One text records the story of a man who asked a physician to cure him of an unusual ailment. This is a most unusual ailment, I ask you. to ask yourself if you have ever had this ailment. The physician said, "First tell me about your symptoms." The man said, "I am not honored when the whole village praises me, nor am I ashamed when the whole country criticizes me. Gain does not make me happy. Loss does not grieve me. Rewards cannot encourage me. Punishments cannot threaten me. I cannot be changed by gain or loss. I cannot be moved by sorrow or happiness. What sickness is this? Is there any way to cure it?" The physician had his patient stand with his back to the light while he looked into his chest. After a while he said, "Aha! I see your heart. It's empty. You are nearly a sage. Your ailment cannot be stopped by my shallow art." His heart was empty of all hardness of heart and non-mercy and inordinate desire. His ego had been dethroned and defrocked. Only the compassion of the Bodhisattva remained. Compassion does not occupy time and space because it is of the Tao, eternal. The empty heart is filled with the things of the Spirit, yet it looks empty because nothing of this world is in it. Thus it is a great chamber where Christ may enter, and you may know Christ within as your true self. Zhuang-Tzu described forgetting the self as freeing yourself from misconceptions. Oh, what a wondrous path it is. Who is the teacher who will be our mentor to tell us what things we have about ourselves as concepts, our misconceptions, and what are true conceptions? Where do you find reality and unreality in the lower self? Can any of us ever see objectively ourselves? Burton Watson writes, "The central theme of the Zhuang-Tzu may be summed up in a single word: freedom." Essentially, all the philosophers of ancient China addressed themselves to the same problem. How is man to live in a world dominated by chaos, suffering, and absurdity? Zhuang-Tzu's answer to the question is, free yourself from the world. Zhuang-Tzu tells the story of a man named Junan Rong, who went to visit the Taoist sage Lao-Tzu in hopes of finding some solution to his worries. When he appeared, Lao-Tzu promptly inquired, "Why did you come with all this crowd of people?" The man whirled around in astonishment to see if there was someone standing behind him. Needless to say, there was not. The crowd of people that he came with was the baggage of old ideas, the conventional concepts of right and wrong, good and bad, life and death, that he lugged about with him wherever he went. It is this baggage that man must first of all discard before he can be free. Misconceptions. No doubt along with his crowd of people, the baggage of his old ideas, he had a crowd of entities who embodied all of those vibrations. Freedom is the byword of Taoism. You will hear it again and again as I unfold the teachings of the Taoist masters. The goal is freedom from negative habits, freedom from misconceptions, freedom from the passions, freedom from worry, fear, and self-concerns, freedom to unfold your original nature, freedom to be the Tao. Not surprisingly, Taoism is the world religion that facilitates our soul development on the seventh ray of God's freedom through the seat of the soul chakra. Through the seventh ray, the soul can be liberated from bondage to the lesser self. She can be liberated to be who she really is. It takes hard work to rout out the desires of the lesser self. Harder than routing them out, in my opinion, is finding out what they are. For these lesser desires that are now long lost in the subconscious pull us away from the Tao. The mystics saw this as the mighty work of the ages. It is the work that you must accomplish by truly knowing yourself. Who is your real self? What is your unreal self? This is what takes place in the purgative stage on the mystic path. As you will recall, mystics pursue a threefold path of ascent to God, consisting of purgation, illumination, and union. In the purgative stage, the mystic comes to know and understand himself. In the illuminative stage, he comes to understand God. And in the unitive stage, he is becoming, day by day, united with God. The mystic is the one who has obeyed the injunction, "Man, know thyself." And thus it is written, "Perfected people govern the inside, not the outside. Their attention is focused internally." Lao Tzu said, "To understand others is to have knowledge. To understand oneself is to be illumined. To conquer others needs strength. To conquer oneself is harder still." The key to conquering yourself is to want to conquer yourself. A large part of you truly does want to conquer yourself, but then there's this little leftover part, the self-indulgent, lazy, depressed, or whatever part, and it pulls in the other direction, and you have to have a sharp eye and a quick mind to catch that part of yourself that would trick you and deter you and take you away from that goal. Conquering oneself. The 19th century American evangelist Dwight Moody said, "I've had more trouble with myself than with any other man I have ever met." You know, that took something to figure out. He was a smart man. Liu Yen said that practitioners of the Tao should spy out the mind's habits, biases, prejudices, fixations, obsessions, and indulgences, so that eventually they can catch them and treat them accordingly. It will not do to be too easygoing. Even slight faults should be eradicated, and even small virtues should be developed. In this way, entanglements may be cut off, and one may become constantly aware of true eternity. Constantly aware of true eternity. The sages teach that one's habits and desires blind one to the dangers of those very habits and desires. You have all seen this, as Liu Yiming explained. Those who like drink are deluded by drink. Those who like sex are deluded by sex. Those who like material goods are deluded by material goods. Those who like wealth and status are deluded by wealth and status. Those who like sport are deluded by sport. This is why the ancient sages taught people to understand the good and go back to the beginning, to return to simplicity and purity, simply to restore the original state. This state is the embryo of sagehood, the seed of immortal enlightenment. It is precisely because we are blinded by our habits, our desires, and our karma that we need the Guru. The seeker asks, "I know I have been a slave to my bad habits and desires. How can I become their master?" The perfect man within answers, "Become the master of stillness and contemplate the inner radiance." It is impossible to become the master of the mind or the emotions if you do not learn the art of the balance of yin and yang in the physical, in your diet, in the program of your day, in what you do, your activity. Only the balance of yin and yang in food, in beverages, in sleep, in waking, in exercise, in everything that you do, will bring you to that point of inner equilibrium where you can meditate as long as you will. And the mind will be your servant, and the emotions will be your servant, and the body will be your servant. As long as you neglect the strengthening of this body as the temple of God, so long will you be incapable of following these prescriptions. You simply cannot do them when your mind is too yin because you've eaten too much yin food. And it's wandering all over the place and thinking a million thoughts a minute about all kinds of different things. You have a yin mind. Until you make this mind yang, concentrated, focused, and your servant, you will not do these things. You will hear me teach them for the rest of your life. But if you do not implement the science of yin and yang into your life and your daily activities, you will not have grasped the heart of true Taoism. Think of these beings 5,000 years ago. Think of what they did not eat that we eat today, the processed foods, the sugars, the tremendous amount of fruits and fruit juices and drugs and recreational drugs and alcohol. All of those things being yin and causing us not to be able to focus. Think of what is happening to civilization, the world around. Will there be anyone left with a yang mind for Moria to contact and send? And when he is commanded to go, he will go, and come, he will come to do the Master's purposes. We have decided we will be those people, haven't we? Yes. And I trust that many people on earth see that what is wrong with the Democratic Party, what is wrong with the Republican Party, what is wrong with our leadership is all of the things we've been discussing. Where can you find the true sage, the holy man, the perfect man? Not in this octave. And that is the sad thing about it. People's bodies today are simply not vehicles for who they really are, who their true self is. Become the master of stillness and contemplate the inner radiance. Lao Tzu advised us to go within and to shut out anything that takes us from concentrating on the Tao. Considering where we are on the path, the best way to get back to the Tao is to focus our attention on our mighty I Am presence and causal body. And thus it is written, the attention of perfected people is focused internally. They keep to the simplicity of wholeness and stand in the center of the quintessential. Something that is the quintessential is the purest of its kind. Quintessence means the essence of a thing in its purest and most concentrated form. The essence of your crown chakra you must seek in its purest and most concentrated form. Lao Tzu said, block the passages, shut the doors, let all sharpness be blunted, all tangles be untied, all glare be tempered, all dust be smoothed. This is called the mysterious leveling. Dust is the Taoist symbol for the noise and the fuss of everyday life. If you are quiet and tranquil, said Lao Tzu, you can become the ruler of the world. And the world you will rule is your own world. And from there you will rule any part of the earth you determine to rule. Tranquility is the master of agitation. One who is agitated loses his master. The perfect man is not moved by distracting thoughts or circumstances, either from within or without. He has the mind of Tao, which is the perfect balance of yin and yang, and yet is a small percentage more yang. It is his source of strength. The Taoist master Zhang Baoduan once said, I'll tell you the reason why people get worn out. Who makes them that way? It is their mind. 100 matters collect in the mind. Before one thought is finished, another thought continues it. There is not a moment of leisure all day long. Zhuangzi said, fortune and blessing gather where there is stillness. If you do not keep still, that is called galloping even while sitting. Author Christmas Humphreys wrote of a Zen master who had mastered this problem. Asked how he exercised himself, the master replied, "When I am hungry, I eat. When tired, I sleep." The reply was sharp. "That is what everybody does." The master said, "When they eat, but they are thinking of other things, thereby allowing themselves to be disturbed. When they sleep, they do not sleep, but they dream of 1,000 things. When I eat, I eat. When I sleep, I sleep." Another Zen master, Yan Men, once advised, "When walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. Above all, don't wobble." Liu Yiming defined the mind of Tao as that which is unconfused in all situations. Its energy is strong, so it is called yang, he said. The Taoist master Li Dao Chun said, "The shining mind is the mind of Tao. The wandering mind is the human mind. The shining mind is always calm. In action it responds to myriad changes. Even when active, it is essentially always calm. The wandering mind is always stirring. In quietude, it produces myriad thoughts. Even when quiet, it is basically a stir. Of old it has been said, always extinguish the stirring mind. Don't extinguish the shining mind." The ancient Taoist adept Zhang Sanfeng said, "It is very difficult to stop the stirring mind. All toilsome rambling and random thoughts are to be dismissed as soon as you become aware of them. When the mind is peaceful and empty, the Tao comes of itself to dwell therein." Peaceful and empty, it is a natural point of polarity with a great Tao. The Tao gently descends and occupies the peaceful and empty mind. The mind is like an eye. If even a tiny hair gets in an eye, the eye is uncomfortable. Day and night, no matter what you are doing, you should attentively settle the mind. Resolve the disturbances. To not do so will affect your health detrimentally. If you are not yet able to attain peace, then you should calmly nurture it, not letting anything vex you. Then you will gain a little peace and relaxation. Gradually taming the mind, it will become increasingly clear and deep. Oxen and horses are domestic animals, but if you let them go free and do not restrain them, they will naturally become wild and will not submit to the harness. So it is with a mind. If you let it run wild and do not restrain it, it will grow increasingly coarse. How then will you be able to perceive that which is subtle? Zhuangzi gave a formula for dealing with distracting thoughts. He tells the story of a troubled man who sought the advice of Lao Tzu. The man went off by himself and tried to cultivate his good qualities and rid himself of the bad ones. After 10 days of making himself miserable, Lao Tzu told him, "You have been very diligent in your washing and purifying, as I can see from your scrubbed and shining look. But there is still something smoldering away inside of you. It would seem that there are bad things there yet. If your obstructions are on the outside, do not attempt to grasp them one by one and thrust them away. This is impossible. Learn to ignore them. In other words, starve them by not engaging them. Let them die of neglect. If your obstructions are within yourself," Lao Tzu said, "you cannot destroy them piecemeal, but you can refuse to let them take effect. You can refuse to let them take effect by scrubbing away layer upon layer with a violet flame. Either the violet flame works or it doesn't. Since it absolutely does work, use it every day with soap and water and a scrub brush. When in the shower, visualize violet flame angels scrubbing you with violet flame soap and water and brush, and see how your mind comes out shining." In the book Corona Class Lessons, dictated by Jesus and Kuthumi to Mark Prophet, Kuthumi gives us a remedy for breaking bad habits. It is similar to Zhuangzi's advice. It is for those who would be disciples of the world teachers, Jesus and Kuthumi. Kuthumi writes, "The scientific factor which governs the establishment of habits is as plain and simple as the sand and the sky. Consent and repetition are prime factors in establishing both negative and positive habits. Denial and abstention are the means of breaking negative habits. The attention must not be placed on the unwanted condition, and no battle must be engaged. Such attention stirs up the dust of emotional energies, which tend to strengthen negation while opposing it." You can put so much attention upon your negatives that you strengthen your negatives at the same time you are trying to get rid of them. Rather than successfully eliminating and transmuting the undesirable habit. The rejection of unwanted habits must come about as the result of the soul's expansion into the divine sense of being God in action. In other words, you really can't get rid of anything that you don't like about yourself if you don't come up higher spiritually. If you could have done something about it already, you would have done something about it already. So now Kuthumi says you have to expand into the divine sense of being God in action. Then you can turn around and deal with that lesser self. It must not come about as a militancy which drives the untoward desires of man into subterranean catacombs of consciousness, one day to crop out as illness or festering frustration. The best way to reject human qualities is to simply forget them through the substitution of Christ-like opposites. Such a method is spiritually scientific, for it flows with the rising currents of divinity, expanding from the heart of man and drawing him upward to the universal Christ consciousness. Become the master of stillness and contemplate the inner radiance. The Taoists describe the stillness of the mind of Tao as imperturbable. Zhang Sanfeng said, "As long as the mind does not stick to things, you can be imperturbable. Don't stick to a commotion that is happening, and don't let it stick to you. Master it, solve it, deal with it." Wang Chongyang taught, "True stillness is when a mountain crashes in front of you and you are not afraid. It is when a pretty woman or a handsome man stands in front of you and your desires are not roused. In stillness, a parent can patiently teach a wayward child. An elder sibling can instruct the younger. Husband and wife can live in harmony. The ruler can attend to the welfare of the ruled. To be imperturbable is to be like the abbot in this Zen story. A rebel army once captured a Korean town, and everyone fled the Zen temple but its abbot. The abbot refused to go out to receive the general of the army. The general was enraged. He burst into the temple and shouted, "Don't you know you are looking at one who can run you through without batting an eye?" "And you," said the abbot, "are looking at one who can be run through without batting an eye." At that, the general smiled, bowed low, and left the temple. Zhuangzi illustrated the virtue of stillness in his parable of the man who was afraid of his shadow. Once there was a man who was afraid of his shadow and who hated his footprints, and so he tried to get away from them by running. But the more he lifted his feet and put them down again, the more footprints he made. And no matter how fast he ran, his shadow never left him. And so, thinking that he was still going too slowly, he ran faster and faster without a stop until his strength gave out and he fell down dead. How many people, high-powered businessmen, come into the decade of the 50s and drop dead? It's the same process. It's exactly what I just read. He failed to realize that if he had merely stepped into the shade, his shadow would have vanished. And if he had sat down and stayed still, there would have been no more footprints. Standing directly in the sun of your mighty I Am presence, or that of your guru at noonday, there is no shadow of death and hell to be afraid of. Placing your feet in the footprints of your holy Christ self, you will no longer loathe your own footprints, for they will have come into conformity with a higher understanding of your real self. And so Isaiah wrote, "How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace." In Jungian psychology, the shadow is one of the archetypes of the collective unconscious. The shadow contains hidden, repressed, and unfavorable aspects of the personality, as well as some good qualities such as creative impulses. The shadow can contain the uncontrolled animal part of ourselves, the abnormal Mr. Hyde of our normal Dr. Jekyll. Become the master of stillness and contemplate the inner radiance. One of the Taoist techniques for achieving stillness is called guarding the one. Guarding the one is the general term for meditation. The one is the Tao. One text emphasizes that although all men have the one, they don't know how to guard it. Olivia Cohn says, guarding the one involves holding the mind under control. Stability of thoughts means not only limitless energy in the body and the end of all physical discomforts, but also mystical oneness with the Tao in the mind. One text says, during all kinds of activities in the midst of thousands of affairs, one must always be thinking of the one. While eating or drinking, think of the one. When happy, think of the one. When anguished, think of the one. When sick, think of the one. Whether passing through water or fire, always think of the one. And especially when you are agitated, think of the one. And thus it is written, perfected people are those whose attention is focused internally. They keep to the simplicity of wholeness and stand in the center of the quintessential. You can think of stillness and meditation as elements of the illuminative stage of the mystic path. In the illuminative stage, the mystic experiences insights and illuminations. He may also experience periods of rapture in his communion with God. In an anecdote in the Zhuangzi, Confucius visited Lao Tzu and found him looking completely inert and like a lifeless body. After some time, Confucius addressed the sage and said, "You seemed to have left the world and men and to have settled in an inaccessible solitude." "Yes," replied Lao Tzu. "I had gone for a stroll at the origin of all things." This is standing in the center of the quintessential. Olivia Cohn writes, according to one text, a practitioner may guard the one by visualizing light. The aim of the practice is initially to restore complete physical health and ultimately to be transformed into the spirit itself. The goal is a mystical union with the light of the universe. Another text instructs, when you persist in guarding the one, there will be nothing within that would not be brilliantly illuminated, and the 100 diseases will be driven out. Zhuangzi said, when man is extremely tranquil, then the heavenly light is given forth. He who emits this heavenly light sees his real self. He who cultivates his real self achieves the absolute. When he achieves the absolute, the human elements will drop away, but the heavenly qualities will come to his assistance.